Controversy has erupted in the Dragon Ball community. Some people on the internet have noticed that the latest V-Jump cover drawn by Toyotaro looks very similar to an old Captain America artwork. Is it a tracing? Let's talk about it. Is Toyotaro a tracer? An artistic integrity crisis? And so, here I have Olympia and or DB Oli and or Oli DB. Tell us about yourself, even the tiniest bit.
Hi, I'm a illustrator and visual development artist. I've worked on things like comic books and concept art, illustrations, technical illustrations, medical illustrations, and sort of a wide gamut of things, and I've been a professional artist for about 10 years now.
Wow, what's your role in the Dragon Ball world?
I sort of pursue drawing Dragon Ball fan art as a hobby, and it's something that I've grown to like quite a bit, and I've gone out of my way to study different approaches and styles and sort of unpack what makes like Dragon Ball art. And so I've closely watched different artists, whether they're in the official sphere or other fan artists.
None of your work looks like fan art. Let's get that out of the way.
Well,
So, all right. So this Toyotaro thing, right? Let's lead with the big question that for some reason is a debate, I guess. I don't know, maybe you'll disagree. Is this work, his V-Jump cover that he did, or the sketch, is it a trace by any definition of the word?
yeah, it is absolutely a trace. I don't think there's any way around it. Of course, there's a range of how extensively you can trace something, but the pose is pretty much traced almost exactly with a few minor changes. But yeah, I think it's fair to describe this as a trace.
For sure. So, like, one thing that I've heard a lot of people saying is, well, first of all, the legs aren't traced in any capacity, which, you know, that's fair. The pose obviously is, but the legs aren't. But then a lot of people are outcrying that front hand and arm is different, and it doesn't perfectly line up, and that's not a trace. What's the deal?
He definitely made his own adjustments, but the core of the drawing, the anatomy, the gesture is all copied pretty much exactly. And it kind of betrays how extensively he traced it when you layer it on top of each other. Of course, like, there's some rotating involved and like a little bit of alterations, but yeah, he certainly traced this pose at the very least.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's I think an important point to make, which is when you're tracing. First of all, tracing isn't necessarily defined as 100%. It is exactly the same thing. That's not it at all. With modern technology and digital, drawing, it's as simple as the flick of a pin and you've rotated a body part so that an arm is in a different position, which, not only is customizable, but really cool for hiding things like tracing.
Right, and one thing I do want to bring up is that we can talk about the technical aspects of tracing like this. The fact of the matter is that some artists do create their own reference material, like 3D poses and such, but that is them creating their own reference material. That is not them swiping from another professional artist. And to me, like, the huge issue here is that the original artist, what's his name, Soy, he spent time learning how to draw anatomy. He spent a lot of time learning how to draw figures like this, and essentially Toyotaro is kind of writing off his knowledge because Toyotaro doesn't possess any of his own. And I'm not trying to drag Toyotaro. I'm just kind of describing the reality of why Toyotaro would do this. And it's a problem because he's essentially appropriating the labor of another artist.
Of course. I mean, I mean, and there's a lot going on in this drawing that takes a lot of, studying and thoughts and just general expertise, not only in anatomy and gesture and posing, but perspective and all these types of things. Things that, take practice, and implying that you could seamlessly do something like this yourself is a pretty big accusation, especially when it's false.
Yeah, and he's not doing this as fan art. He's getting a check from this. So I just find it highly objectionable, and I hear a lot of people saying, well, he has to meet a deadline, artists take shortcuts, and that's very true. Artists do take shortcuts. Like, in like professional like visual development, you see some photo bashing, you see people using 3D models, but a lot of that is using resources that were meant to be referenced, resources that have attribution, and all that sort of stuff. But if you are caught swiping directly from another artist like this, it's not tolerated.
For sure. So yeah, that's one thing that I was gonna ask is one thing that I've heard a lot of people say is, I actually heard one person say that not only is this commonplace in the artistic field, tracing like this, but it's encouraged in some fields. The validity of that is...
It's not encouraged. Tracing like this is not encouraged. What is encouraged is meeting deadlines, meeting milestones, and doing whatever it takes to meet those things. However, there is a limit to that. You are encouraged to use whatever resources you can. However, straight swiping off another artist is never really an acceptable approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you in particular are you've had your fair share of people tracing off of you and, making a dime off of it, not attributing you, right?
Right, and that's hurtful because, time is money, and I spend a lot of time studying how to draw these things and learning how to draw these things, and it's one thing when it's a hobbyist that is making like $40 off a t-shirt or something like that, but this is a major publisher in Japan, and to be honest with you, I'm kind of questioning the consequences, because there's no way editorial didn't know that he traces. He's done it like so many times in the super manga with Toriyama's work. He's done it with other manga. He was known to do it in his fan comics. So
albeit this is definitely probably the most direct and worst usage of this that we've seen. There's been a lot of instances where things are like one part of it's traced, or it's heavily referenced, aka homage, I guess, if that's what you want to call it, which you shouldn't.
No.
But yeah, this is definitely a pattern.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't an homage because there's no obvious attribution to the original art. Let's just get that straight.
No. Anybody that calls this homage, oh man.
But another thing too is that, like, this is an exceptionally egregious example because a lot of people, in the manga gave him the benefit of the doubt, where, you have to draw a lot to complete a manga, and you have to draw it within a month. So people say, well, he copies Toriyama, it's supposed to be a Dragon Ball comic, that's what people want. And I think that's fair, but the fact of the matter is that there are plenty of artists that are exceptional who could meet the deadlines without having to resort to techniques like this, that are generally frowned upon in the professional world.
Yeah. So Toyotaro traced this to some extent, to a surprising, insulting extent. And it's not really something that's cool in the professional world. Let's shift from an artistic perspective, from an artist's perspective, professional. Why should anybody that reads or watches Dragon Ball or likes Dragon Ball care? What impact does this make, do you think?
To me, when they hire a guy like Toyotaro who sort of rides off the labor of other artists so they can meet their bottom line, really just shows to me that the publisher doesn't actually believe in the integrity of the product or the integrity of Dragon Ball. Um, like I mentioned before, I don't know if editorial knows that he traces, but if nothing happens to him after this, then I think it's clear to me that they don't care. And I just find that to be shameful because Dragon Ball historically has a pretty strong artistic pedigree. And I think this sort of doesn't follow that tradition.
No, for sure. And I mean, I don't know. I feel like the idea that in order to draw anything visually interesting in less than, 300 years, a person needing to trace, I feel like having someone like that at the helm of something as big as the Dragon Ball Super manga, not only does that show a lack of care from these publishers, I feel like just solely from a viewer's perspective, I feel like that really bottlenecks what you can see visually. When you have an artist whose visual library of poses and like angles and perspectives is incredibly narrow, then you're gonna get, I don't know, a chapter with the exact same framing and head turn 5 times in one chapter. I don't. It's more than just an artistic integrity thing. It's very much something that impacts viewers and that people should care about the same way that people care about Kitano art in Dragon Ball Super.
Right. When you see stuff like this, that's sort of an amalgamation of tracing and reuse poses. It just sort of indicates a lack of a real vision, and I think that's something that's clearly lost in the Super manga, with regards to both writing and art. And again, like, I'm hesitant to say these things about Toyotaro. I've defended him in the past. He's another working artist. I usually try not to trash artists publicly, and I'm not trying to purposefully like slander him, but this is something else.
No, yeah. I wouldn't consider any of this, not only our conversation, but the majority of things being said on the internet, I wouldn't consider it bashing for the sake of bashing. I mean, and even people that, Toyotaro has made some interesting, like leaps and bounds in his mental database, it would seem, over the course of the last X amount of years. Like, comparing his older stuff compared to some of the stuff in, say, like, the early Trunks arc of the Super manga. Like, there's definitely some interesting, like, visuals that he's built in his years. It's just, I don't know, it's kind of, not only is this absolutely just wrong and just defies any sort of integrity, but I feel like this is kind of a similar problem that a lot of people point out with Tadayoshi Yamamuro, where you've got someone who isn't necessarily horrible, isn't necessarily someone that absolutely needs to be dragged through the mud, but when you look at where they're at on the totem pole, it's just not the right spot at all.
Right. He definitely doesn't seem to be cut out for the job, especially when you consider the material that came before him. But yeah, like you mentioned, there's aspects of his work that I enjoy. I think he can draw when he doesn't necessarily resort to these things. I do think there's flaws in his work, like famously wonky anatomy.
Which, can we talk about how appropriate it is that the thing that he decided to trace had, like, the trademark like Toyotaro neck?
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing he can't quite grasp. But he's working on it.
Yeah, no, like, I don't think he's a horrible person or anything.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. He's definitely made leaps and bounds and efforts as an artist, and he's drawn some stuff that I love. I absolutely love Toyotaro's ability to, like, emote and just expressiveness in general.
Right.
It's just, yeah, I love that kind of stuff. But, I mean, you can be very critical of someone who deserves criticism while also not thinking that they're the scum of the earth, despite what some people think.
Yeah, and I think that while I find a lot of objectionable opinions coming out in defense of him, I do think a lot of people are trying to be as diplomatic as possible. and are trying to come off as reasonable as possible. But the thing is that when you sort of face something like this in the professional world, the consequences of it are sort of laid to bear, and there's no way around it. It's just deeply unprofessional.
For sure. Okay, so let's loop back around to the point of this whole thing, to the title. As far as this particular work goes, what are we calling a trace?
Okay. So the entire gesture and pose, and I would say even some of the musculature has been traced. Even though it's not evident in the sketch or the final drawing he posted, it's definitely like underlying. The arm is the most egregious example, along with the angle of the torso, as well as the angle of the head. Yeah, just about everything. I think also the angle, the way the foot is drawn is
Yeah.
it's not something I would expect Toyotaro to do off the top of his head.
No, absolutely not. And even if, for instance, the legs and the pants in general don't perfectly match, those weren't necessarily traced, but you're using that pose directly, using those original legs as an armature for his legs is still a reach in integrity in the first place.
Right.
So I wouldn't exactly call that a defense.
And it looks like he chopped up the original drawing and sort of placed everything the way he would like it, but he's still using gross components of the other artist's work.
And not only that, but I mean, you can look at that two ways. You can say he cut it up to be the way you wanted, or you could say he cut it up so it's less likely to be noticed that it's a trace.
Right, it's not detected. Yeah.
Right.
But he was pretty bold when he posted the sketch.
Yeah.
I'm guessing
man.
he didn't think anyone would notice, or maybe in his mind this is an acceptable practice.
I don't know. Kids these days, right?
What is he, like 40?
Is he? He doesn't
Yeah.
look 40.
I don't
Okay.
know.
Well, there's the question. Olympia, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. You are lovely and amazing and awesome.
Anytime.
Do you have anything that you want to plug?
You can check out my Twitter. It's Oli_DB, OLY_DB, and everything I got going on is basically there. And I also have a store that will be up on May 30th.
Sick. Okay, bye.
Thank you.